Carlene Ponder, one of the co-chairs of the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. Thank you all for coming out on this frigid day. We're out for an incredibly important matter that has serious implications locally here for people in Montgomery County, the state of Maryland, and also for the country as we continue to push for transparency and accountability between law enforcement and the people that they are there to service. I'll tell you a little bit about the Silver Spring Justice Coalition and then we'll kick it off. We were founded in 2018 after Robert White was killed in Silver Spring. Robert was killed just a few blocks from where I live, and I remember being absolutely shocked when I read the sparse, details that were given at that time in the paper about a man being shot multiple times by a police officer in my own neighborhood. And those of us who chose to dig in a little further and not accept the initial, somebody was aggressive towards a police officer, sort of, police spin-off, PR release, went a little further. We got together, we started talking, we started making phone calls. People came together in an initial protest. We needed to know, what happened. We needed to know why something like this occurred in our community, and there was very little information forthcoming. From there, we sat around as people who were outraged by the killing, as people who were neighbors of Robert White, people who knew him, family members who knew him, organizations who were involved in social justice and civil rights work in the community, faith groups who were outraged by what happened in this community. And we decided that we were going to organize. We decided that we weren't going to accept the status quo of another Black person unarmed, shot dead by police without explanation in our own community. And unfortunately, the Silver Spring Justice Coalition still exists today because there are names that we have had to add to the list after Robert White's killing in 2018. So it's really important that we pay attention to what's happening in the courtroom, in the court behind us, because it has, as I said, implications for community safety. One of the things that we encountered as an initial grassroots group with the killing of Robert White is that we were unable to get information about the officer's history, the officer who shot and killed him. There was speculation that he had been involved in other excessive force incidents in the past. We know that he was employed with a different police agency before coming to Montgomery County, but all of that information was shrouded in secrecy. And it didn't feel as if the community had an equal hand or a fair hand in saying, wait a minute, this person that you have authorized to carry a lethal weapon, to walk around with a badge and a gun in our community may be a danger to some of us, particularly those of us who are Black, particularly to those of us who have disabilities, especially any form of mental health disability, as Robert White did. It's very disheartening to see that our county is now saying to us that they will resist every attempt to make that type of information available to the public. And that's what they're doing today. And that's why we, the community, came out today to say enough is enough. Montgomery County needs to live up to its reputation as being progressive. And so we expect that to also mean that they're progressive in the way that policing is done. And I'm gonna pass it off to my co-chair, the Silver Spring Justice Coalition, Joanna Silver.
Thanks, Carlene. I want to give us a little bit more information, some background on why we are here today. So when Anton's Law went into effect in October of 2021, the Silver Spring Justice Coalition began to request the misconduct records for police officers who have killed or harmed members of our community, including the officer who killed Robert White. And we learned through this process that the release of the records we asked for was going to be delayed because the Montgomery County Police Department was negotiating a memorandum of agreement with our police union, the FOP. And this was going to obligate the police department to give the FOP 10 days notice before releasing any police misconduct records. As a result, it took us months to get records that we were supposed to get in only 30 days. This was all because of an agreement that granted our FOP and officers rights that are not included in Anton's Law. And then we learned that MCPD was refusing to release records at all requested by one member of our community, a woman named Alexa Renahan. And that was because of this 10-day notice. And they used this extra 10 days to file a lawsuit against Montgomery County, arguing that these particular records should not be released and raising challenges to Anton's Law itself. And then adding insult to injury, we found out that our county attorney, the same county attorney who signed off on this illegal memorandum of agreement, consented to a motion filed by the FOP to keep the entire case under seal. So you can understand why we don't trust our county attorney to represent the interests of our community, and therefore we are incredibly grateful to the several parties who have filed motions to intervene on behalf of Ms. Renahan and on behalf of the community. And we hope that the court will grant those motions to intervene today. And I want to make it clear that we think our county attorney, Mark Elrich, can and should withdraw from this memorandum of agreement. Over 250 members of our community have emailed our county executive asking him to terminate the agreement. He has not terminated the agreement, and he's refused to meet with us to talk about it. And when confronted publicly, the excuse he gives is that he needs the help of the FOP to make sure his police department doesn't release records that it's not supposed to release under Anton's Law. That's what he says this 10 days notice is for, so that the FOP can make sure that the police department is doing its job. And I'll repeat here what I've said to him in public forums and in a letter that we wrote to the Washington Post. It is the job of your custodian of records to make sure you follow the law. The FOP has no place in this process. Now I want to introduce Sergio Espana, who's the Director of Engagement and Mobilization for the ACLU of Maryland. Sergio will speak on behalf of the ACLU and the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability about why this case is so important to organizations and individuals throughout Maryland, and also share a statement from the legal team representing the MCJPA in its motion to intervene in the case today.
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks everyone for being here on this winter solstice. I'm actually going to just quickly read a statement from our senior staff attorney, David Roca, who can't be here because he's making sure that the team is at the ready for a hearing that's going to start in less than 45 minutes. So to begin, the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability has sought to intervene in the FOP's lawsuit seeking to block Montgomery County from releasing internal affairs clearly authorized by Anton's Law, because the lawsuit is a frontal attack on the law, seeking basically to judicially gut it and achieve in the courts what they did not achieve in the General Assembly. Anton's Law is one of the most important transparency and accountability bills the General Assembly has passed in decades, opening up records about one of the most important functions of government, policing the police, that have until now been shrouded in secrecy. It is not surprising that the FOP is seeking to undermine that law, since it fought tooth and nail against it in the General Assembly. It is appalling to see the FOP's efforts sadly aided and abetted by the Montgomery County government through the executive's office, which is what has happened here. The side deal that the county entered into with the FOP, providing them the records of internal affairs investigations the county has identified as responsive to public record requests, and withholding those records from the requester to enable the FOP to file suit to stop such releases, is not something the county had to bargain about, had to do, or does in any other context. And it violates both Anton's law and also long-standing MPIA statutory obligations. And the fact that the county consented to the FOP's improper request to conduct all of the court briefing, in this case under seal, in secret, and reverse position only when prompted by the proposed interveners in this case, is beyond appalling. If there's any case that should not be litigated in secret, it is the FOP's attempt to undermine this critically important transparency law. And the lawsuit that the FOP has filed is not authorized by existing case law governing judicially created Reverse Public Information Act lawsuits, because those suits are allowed only when there are grounds to argue that the release of the records is prohibited by law. But none of the records at issue here are prohibited from release thanks to Anton's law, whose sole and critical function was to make these records releasable. And the specific arguments that the FOP advances in the lawsuit seeking to block release are foreclosed by the text of Anton's law itself, which applies to all internal affairs records regardless of when they were created. The FOP's arguments reveal their true intent to try to set itself up as a substitute custodian of these records, making the discretionary decisions about when release is appropriate, rather than the government officials to whom the law gives that power. And their assertion that the legislator's decision to allow transparency over these records violates officers' rights to privacy has been appropriately rejected by every court in the country considering similar claims by police unions seeking to undercut transparency laws in those jurisdictions. We hope that the court will allow MCJPA, the statewide coalition that shepherded Anton's law through the General Assembly, the opportunity to defend the law from the FOP's continued attacks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. I'm now going to introduce Samantha Blau, who is the Policy and Engagement Director for the Baltimore Action Legal Team. BALT has been at the forefront of litigating access to police misconduct records in Maryland since the passage of Anton's law. They are acting as local counsel in partnership with the Vanderbilt Law School's First Amendment Clinic in representing Alexa Ranahan, the person who requested the misconduct records at issue in this case, in her motion to intervene.
Okay, so I'm going to be reading a statement that is from Jennifer Sastrom of the Stanton First Amendment Clinic, as well as my colleague Matthew Zernhelt from Baltimore Action Legal Team. Vanderbilt Law School's Stanton Foundation First Amendment Clinic and Baltimore Action Legal Team represent Alexa Ranahan, a resident of Maryland, whose request for the disciplinary records of a Montgomery County police officer are the subject of this litigation. This case was filed by the Fraternal Order of Police of Montgomery County to seek and prevent the disclosure of disciplinary records. Pursuant to a pre-existing contractual agreement between the county and the police union, plaintiffs were given the opportunity to object to the production of the disciplinary records and filed this lawsuit to prevent their disclosure. This suit threatens to undermine the effectiveness of the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021, also referred to as Anton's Law, which makes police disciplinary and misconduct records available to the public through the Maryland Public Information Act. This also risks undermining the transparency the legislature sought to further in passing the law. Today's hearing will determine whether Ms. Ranahan can become a party to the existing lawsuit to raise these arguments and vindicate her access to the public records disputed in this case. This is a first and important step to make sure that all the issues are raised before the court, especially in light of the contract between the county and their police union. Ms. Ranahan explains her ongoing efforts to obtain these files, saying, "I originally submitted my records request in January 2022. After months of negotiating regarding the scope and cost of documents, I paid the required fees on April 8th of this year. Despite having requested this disciplinary record of an officer 11 months ago and having paid for them 8 months ago, I have not received any files." For Ms. Ranahan, the importance of this litigation goes beyond her desire to obtain the disciplinary records of one officer and impacts every records requester. She goes on to say, when the law allows, I believe that the public has an obligation to look into the disciplinary actions of an officer if they have reason to believe that the officer engages in behavior that is outside of the scope of his or her authority and harmful to the public. It is for this reason the Maryland legislature enacted Anton's law, that Montgomery County leaders have determined that keeping police misconduct shrouded in secrecy is more important than the public's right to know about the misconduct of officers being paid to keep them safe is abhorrent. This litigation will serve as a test of Maryland's efforts to improve government transparency and police accountability. We at BALT believe that the police will force litigation and work to exhaust community resources before operating under the law, but nevertheless, we will keep pushing for transparency. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. It's next my pleasure to introduce Councilmember Will Jawando. Councilmember Jawando was just reelected to his second term as an at-large member of our county council. From the very beginning of his first term, he has been a champion for transparency and accountability in policing, introducing the very first police reform bill our county ever passed, the LED Act, as well as our county's use of force law and the policing data bill, among others. We are so happy that with our new council, he will have more progressive partners to work with. I know we have staff here today with who work for one of those partners, Councilmember Lorianne Sales. We are grateful that he is here to speak with us today.
Thank you. I know it's hard to clap with the cold and the signs, but you don't have to clap. As was mentioned, I'm Councilmember Will Jawando. I appreciate SSJC, BALT, the ACLU of Maryland, all of the coalition for all the work you've done. The LED Act was mentioned, which requires an independent investigation anytime an officer is involved in the death of a resident. That was used in state legislation to now that we have that from the AG's office, who will investigate all police-involved death across the state. It's important because we vest in our police appropriately a lot of responsibility and a lot of power. And with great responsibility, with great power rather, comes great responsibility. And you need transparency in the process. There's a saying in the civil rights movement and that has been used, and it's really important: justice delayed is justice denied. And in this case, you just heard the very poignant story about someone who's seeking information they are entitled to by law, under Anton's law, that is having to pay and wait multiple months and jump through multiple hoops before they can get the information. You see the parties to this lawsuit, the Washington Post, the ACLU, SSJC, go down the list, BALT. This is not a partisan issue. This isn't a I'm against police or for police. We need law enforcement as part of a broader public safety system, but we need transparent and accountable law enforcement. You know, that's what government officials are called to do, especially those who have the power to take liberty and to take life. And the public deserves to know how that delegated power that we, the people, give to our law enforcement to keep us safe is used, and if it's used appropriately. This is a key mechanism. Transparency, knowing the history of officers. The law at the state level requires and allows the custodian to release these records. We don't need an extra process intervening. The 10 days that was negotiated, again, I didn't know about that until it came out. I was not consulted by the county executive. I've told him that we should not have done that. This extra 10 days is a delay. It only serves to find something to dispute the release, to file a lawsuit. That's the only purpose. If you are concerned about, in this whole great building here, hire more people to review the records if you're concerned about errors. We don't need to give it to the people who are the subject of the transparency law to review the records. There should be a different person doing that. That's the basis of good governance and transparency and accountability. So I'm proud here to stand with you all today. I think we need this case to go in the right direction. I will be pushing and working with colleagues and using my voice to make sure that we remind people that indeed justice delayed is justice denied. I also want to thank Councilmember Lorianne Sales, whose staff is here, Councilmember Kristen Mink, who is here, Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, who is here, who are all, Delegate Gabe Acevero, who you'll hear from shortly, who authored Anton's law. This is a collective effort as was mentioned, we hadn't had one criminal justice reform bill introduced prior to 2018. Now we've had several. We're continuing the push, and the goal is to keep every resident safe and that they feel and are safe in their community. In order to do that, you have to have transparency and accountability for those who are entrusted with part of that system. So thank you all for your efforts, and we'll keep pushing.
Thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Delegate Acevero. He represents District 39 here from Montgomery County. Delegate Acevero was also just re-elected to his second term. He was the original sponsor of Anton's Law, the landmark legislation that finally gave the community the right to access police misconduct records. For that reason, we are so glad that he is here with us today to share his views about this case that seeks to undermine the work that Delegate Acevero and so many members of the community and advocates have done for so many years to create transparency.
Good morning, and thank you to the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability and all of the organizers of this morning's action, which I think is critical to not only raise awareness, but to spur action and to call on our neighbors, our community members, to not only pay attention to, but to be involved to counter some of these efforts that are currently taking place to undermine transparency in our county and in our state. As was mentioned, I'm Delegate Gabriel Acevero, and I represent District 39 here in Montgomery County, and I'm the sponsor of Anton's Law, which not only passed in 2021 with the Police Accountability Act, but also is the law right here in Maryland as we speak. And this law is critical when we talk about transparency, and the reason why we called it Anton's Law is because it was named after Anton Black, and that young African-American student that was killed and whose life was snuffed out. There was a common thread, not just in the case of Anton Black, but what we see in many police brutality cases, and that is a pattern of abuse when it comes to the officers who are named in these police brutality cases. And that pattern of abuse is oftentimes unknown to the general public or to folks who are seeking accountability because of laws. And so we've since changed that by updating the Maryland Public Information Act to ensure that police misconduct records are accessible to the public. And the purpose of that is to ensure that we're rooting out corrupt, racist, and abusive cops who all too often fly under the radar and continue to be employed and collect a paycheck while abusing the public trust. And so the fact that the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 35, an affiliate of the FOP that time and again has been at the forefront of every effort to oppose police transparency and accountability, should not come as any surprise to our community, but we should be mobilizing to fight against this legal effort, which is dangerous and has serious implications for transparency and accountability. We cannot have trust without accountability, and we cannot have accountability without transparency. And we need to know the people who are not only policing our streets, but the people who are employed by police departments and precincts all across our county. And Anton's Law provides that level of transparency to the community to ensure that those abusive cops, those very same folks who've been flying under the radar, that we can have that a misconduct record be made available to the public or whomever requests it without any delay. And the fact that there was an MOA that was signed by our county and the Fraternal Order of Police, I think undermines the intent of what the legislature did last year in passing Anton's Law. And we have to certainly fight against that, but more importantly, I want to thank the folks who are involved in challenging this effort by the Fraternal Order of Police to undermine Anton's Law, because what they are doing is essentially using the judiciary to do the work that they otherwise could not have gotten the legislature to do, which is keeping records concealed and away from public view. But we changed that with Anton's Law, and we have to protect it. We have to ensure that this law continues to be around for the sake of accountability. And I'm calling on our county executive and our county officials to ensure that we are enforcing the spirit of Anton's law, which is transparency, particularly as it relates to policing. So we have a lot more work to do. I want to thank coalition members. Let's continue to pay attention, and let's continue to call out the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35, and other affiliates who attempt to undermine Anton's law and any police reform efforts that we passed last year. This is unacceptable. I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it. The FOP and the FOP Lodge 35 is an expressly anti-black organization, and they have shown that in the way that they have advocated, what they push for, what they advocate against, and we as a community have to push against that. This is an organization that is seeking the interests of corrupt, abusive, and racist cops, not the interest of our community. And the fact that they're challenging this in court tells you everything that you need to know about this organization and the attention that we need to pay to this case. So thank you all for being here on this cold morning. Anton's law is going to continue to be the law in Maryland, and we're going to fight those efforts. I want to thank my colleague, Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield from District 39, who is on Judiciary Committee. Even though I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, she has also been a critical part of this effort in making sure that Anton's law was passed. And let's defend it, because this is about transparency and it's about accountability. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I also wanted to make sure folks know that the pro bono team from Wiley Ryan, who's assisting the ACLU of Maryland in representing the MCJPA in this lawsuit, is also here with us today, and we really appreciate the work that they are doing on all of our behalf. And the hearing is going to begin at 10 o'clock, and you can go in and watch, so we hope that everybody here will think about doing that. So I want to just close by saying that the Silver Spring Justice Coalition is not happy to be hosting this press conference today. We are not proud to be from the county that is leading the effort to undermine a critical piece of police reform legislation. We hope everyone will continue to pay close attention to this lawsuit, and we hope everyone will reach out to our county executive to make sure he knows that we do not want this memorandum of agreement. We think our county should lead on expanding police transparency, not on undermining it. Thank you so much.